Hello, everyone. Welcome to Exploring Intersections. My name is Meenakshi Iyer, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Nigel Wison. So we'll get into it in a minute. So thank you again for joining us on a Saturday. This is episode 7, and we Exploring Intersections is a LinkedIn live space dedicated to unpacking intersections as we co-create a future of work that works for everyone. So what we typically do here is chat about how different intersections in our professional and personal lives play out and shape our lived experience. And today we have with us Nigel Wison. Thank you for joining us, Nigel, on a Saturday morning.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so Nigel, in his professional role, serves as the Senior VP of Technology Operations America region at dentsu International. And dentsu is a multinational media and digital marketing communications company. And Nigel is responsible for the internal customer-facing infrastructure, services, processes, etc., for the Americas. And I have had the pleasure of being Nigel's mentee through the Female Foundry Program organized by dentsu in partnership with several other global agencies. And we met, I want to say about a year and a half ago, Nigel?
About that, yes.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle of 2020. And the fantastic thing has been that we've still kept our conversations going long after the mentorship program formally ended. And that's been such a privilege. So thank you very much for being here with us today, Nigel. And I would like us to begin, if you wouldn't mind, by sharing a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I work for dentsu. I've been with dentsu since 2018. Prior to my time at dentsu, I spent 10 years at News Corp and Dow Jones in a number of senior technology positions, the most recent being Global Vice President of End User Services. I also, obviously based on my accent, from the UK. So I've been in the US now for about 8 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's definitely feels like home. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I live in Long Island with my better half as well.
Great, thank you, Nigel. And yes, that's the other thing. It's interesting that I noticed that when we first met. It's like, oh, he's British. And then I know we've had some conversations around that as well. And I'm looking forward to exploring some of those aspects as we unpack today's intersection. We continue to explore the intersection of culture, language, and gender and how it plays out in our lived experience, in shaping our lived experience. So who we are, where we come from, what languages we speak, and how we speak them. All of these play a role in shaping how we see the world and how we are seen and perceived as well. So in last month's episode, we had Kwan Segal talk to us about this, and I felt that there's so much happening at this intersection that it's worth continuing to explore this a little bit more and get diverse perspectives on this topic. So that's how I, my own conversations with Nigel sort of we've talked about several aspects of this during our mentorship meetings as well. So here we are. Before we actually get into some of the questions that we have, Nigel, what has really stood out for you in your experience as you transitioned from one side of the Atlantic to the other?
I'll definitely say, I mean, I've spent many a time in the US as a tourist. I have family in the US, but I must say, visiting as a tourist and living are two very distinct experiences. I actually did struggle to acclimate to life in the US more than I thought I would. I think the first year moving over full time was a real struggle, and I did question whether it was the right move for me. You don't realize it, but there are some quite significant cultural differences. Even though the US and the UK are very close, there are very distinct cultural differences. And I did struggle a little bit with that, making the transition. But after the first year, and I really did manage to get a real footing, found my way, and it really did start to feel like home. I know you mentioned it when we kicked off the session, but one thing I did find interesting was the affinity to the British accent. I did find that as soon as folks picked up on the accent, it was all about, so you're British, how long have you been here? I've always wanted to go to London, which is, again, in the UK, you don't get that because you hear the British accent all the time.
Yeah.
So I did feel like I got the sense that I was seen as British first after the accent and black second, which was, again, a very interesting dynamic. My other half does get sick and tired of it when we go anywhere and people pick up on the British accent and they want to hear more about the UK and how I'm finding things in the US. So, but it never gets old for me. I think it's fascinating.
So that's so interesting that you shared that, Nigel, that, to me, that what that brought up is that accent bias is real. It's a thing.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Right?
Lived experience.
Yeah. And the other thing that came up for me is when you compared the experience that your spouse has as opposed to you. I understand your spouse is from here, right? She's from the US.
Yes.
So I think suddenly those intersections in your identities, kind of the order changes, right? Like,
oh, yeah, certainly.
You are, I mean, other than you being black or you being a man, the accent kind of comes to the top is what I was sensing.
Yeah, 100%. And I did really find that interesting because, again, especially with New York, it's a very popular tourist destination. So you hear a multitude of accents. So I found it interesting that individuals will still pick up on the British accent and be so fascinated by it, given that they hear it quite often. But it's also very interesting as well because obviously when you listen to the news and TV, radio, I always get a little, it sounds strange, I always get a little confused when I hear a British accent on the TV because I'm not accustomed to hearing that. And I'm like, that's such a strange way of thinking these days because, again, I'm British, but I don't hear it that often on the TV. So, again, I've also flipped in my thinking and I pick up on the British accent when I don't hear it that often as well. So it's, it's interesting.
So thank you for sharing that. And I think that, I'm an immigrant in this country as well. And I came here as an accompanying spouse. And when I think about language and accents, my experience has been totally different. So first of all, it took me a long while to realize there's a term for it, and it's called microaggression. But I would often get told that, oh, your English is very good. And how did that happen? And I actually would kind of explain myself around it without paying much thought to the undercurrent in that, And it's only of late that I realized that, well, English is just a language. It's not a measure of anyone's intelligence. So that's been my experience. So it's so interesting for me to hear your side of the story in the U.S. as a foreigner in the U.S. So I wanted to kind of take that a little bit further. And my first question to you really is this intersection of culture, gender, language. What does this mean to you? And in this case, I want to focus on two of your intersectional identities, which is in the professional life, you're a technology executive, you come from that space, and then personally, your identity as a Black man. So how do these intersect for you? How does this influence your lived experience at work and otherwise?
So from a technology executive standpoint, I definitely feel that I have an obligation to pave the way for others who look like me. I know that there's a renewed focus and drive in many organizations, and I think in the country as a whole, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, from a gender perspective as well as from an ethnicity perspective. So I think it's important, especially for the next generation, to be able to see that you can be successful irrespective of your gender, your ethnicity, the color of your skin, etc. So I think from my position, or leadership position, I feel that I do have that obligation, and I need to be able to lead by example, and be involved with the next generation to show that you can be successful. These opportunities can be sought. And again, look, I'm the proof there. So I think as a leader within technology, that is definitely part of my role. We're doing some great work within the organization I work with, trying to push forward the DEI agenda, as are many organizations. And again, that work needs to continue within the corporate world, across the board as well.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about that, you talked about the sense of obligation that you feel. Does that also come from your own experience? Like, what was your experience growing up in terms of representation in the world that you inhabit now?
So, interestingly, I mean, people see me as being a black man, but my mum is actually Indian. So my parents, they were born and grew up in a country called Guyana, which is in South America. And as I mentioned, my father is black, and my mother is Amerindian. And back in the days when they were growing up, there was a very distinct divide between the two cultures as well as ethnicities. And when it came to things like marriage, it was not really the done thing to marry outside of your ethnicity. And I mean, my mum did have a hard time with that, deciding to marry my father. And I think for me as well, growing up, in particular, I mean, I'm one of 5 siblings. We all had our own different experiences growing up. And for me, I did struggle with identity because I was much closer to my mother's side of the family, but didn't really look like anyone on my mother's side of the family. Didn't really have much of a relationship with my dad's side of the family. So I did really struggle as I was growing up to really understand, right, well, I'm closer to the culture there. But my cousins, my aunts and uncles, they don't really look like me. And as you get older, you get a better understanding and you accept it and you embrace your differences, etc. But you always get the questions, right? You go to weddings, etc., and folks are like, well, you know, who are you related to, etc. Like my cousin getting married. Oh, interesting. Which again, you accept, you understand. I mean, people don't really know the dynamic until you explain it to them.
Yeah.
But I think for me, growing up, being very close to my mother's side of the family and my mother as well, I'm close to my father, but having that relationship with my mother and really embracing her culture, it was a little difficult to kind of grasp until I got older, and then I understood it better. But there's definitely 2 sides to me. Even though you see me as being a black man, I've got dual heritage.
Right. And I remember the first time you shared that with me, and I had that sense of, I didn't realize that. And when you talked about it just now, it struck me the same way that I'm going by what I see, and then there's this whole it's a sort of unconscious bias that kicks in, really, right? Of bias in the sense of, oh, I know who you are based on what you look like.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting that you called out the Indian side of your heritage, and I'm from India, and I can relate to that so well. And the other interesting aspect for me, in my experience, growing up in India and living there, I moved here as an adult, but in India, I look like a North Indian, but then I have a South Indian name. So I grew up, my entire life in India, I've already always had to explain myself, my appearance and the languages I speak and all of that. Um, so to me, it's very interesting to hear your experience coming from a totally different part of the world. And I also want to acknowledge your vulnerability in sharing that with us. Thank you very much. So that kind of leads me into the second question: is how has this whole experience influenced your life and work?
So from um, a life perspective, I've definitely embraced the cultural differences
Mm,
and learnt to understand, right, that people will see you one way until they get to know you, and then they'll understand that, as you mentioned, there's more to you than meets the eye.
mm,
And I do enjoy providing that insight and that breakdown because it helps people understand and learn that again, you don't necessarily take people on face value. Um, I think from a work perspective, um, again, living and working in the US, as I mentioned, I'm seen as British until I get the opportunity to have deep, meaningful conversations with individuals about background and the dynamics of um, relationships and family. I think for me, it's definitely made me more fascinated about cultures and the different makeup of individuals. Um, if I get to meet someone who has had a similar experience as me, I'm always interested to understand, well, how did you um, uh, go through the whole concept of identity and your affinity to one or the other? Um, and I think I always feel that our differences make us unique, and it's something that we need to embrace as a society, um, because again, it's important for us to always learn and understand and be educated about the differences between us. I think there's still a lot of naivety out there that leads to ignorance that
mm,
does cause division. So I think with people being open and learning to and be willing and to understand and learn about different cultures and experiences, that will help us as a ultimately a race be more inclusive and understanding. So I think for me, knowing the different makeup of my own life
mm,
has led me to be inquisitive about others as well, if they're willing and open to share. Right,
mm,
it's always a sensitive subject depending on people's experiences, but if they are, I always welcome those opportunities for
mm.
conversation and understanding.
Yeah. So this, like your own intersectional identity and your understanding of that, um, how similar or different was that for you living in the UK, living and working in the UK versus working in the US?
So, from my personal experience, I definitely have felt, just in general, that I've had more opportunity in the US than I would have done in the UK.
Hmm.
Um, I think the the relationship that the US has with the UK is very strong, and it will continue to be. I think the fact that the US is so vast, it tends to be a bit of a melting pot in certain states, especially if you think about New York. There's a lot of
Mm,
diversity, which provides rich culture. Um, has kind of helped me, I think, in many ways, develop my career, and allowed me to kind of progress, I think, further than I would have in the UK.
mm,
Um, Especially, I think, with the UK making the decision to leave the European Union as well. I think opportunities to some extent are not as uh, vast as they would have been.
mm,
Um, so I think from a job perspective, um, and career perspective, there has been more opportunity in the US compared to in the UK. I
mm,
think, as I mentioned, from a cultural standpoint as well. I mean, you only really, I mean, from my perspective, you only really realize that there's so many cultural differences even across states until you live here. I think
yeah.
in the UK, many people feel that, I mean, America is America in many respects, right? Um, but there's differences in accents, terms, culture
Mm,
across states. Um,
mm,
and it's only when you actually get the opportunity to kind of immerse yourself in those different states, you truly understand how diverse it is in the US. I mean, in the UK, to a lesser degree, yes. As you go like further up north, you do um, get that sense of um, as well change. But in the US, I think for me, based on my experiences, it's a lot more vast than compared to what I've experienced in the UK.
mm, mm. And as you were talking, I also realized that from what I have read and understood, I've never visited the UK myself, but what I've seen and read, there's a big thing about accents in in the UK. That's a big part of one's identity. The most recent thing was just 2 days ago, and I can't remember the name of this parliamentarian, but she's from the northern part of the country, and the social media started picking on her accent as opposed to focusing on the content of what she was saying, which made a whole lot of sense. Um, and I feel like the intersection of class, like your socioeconomic status, and the, the accent with which you speak English, that's like a sort of a deadly combination in what I have seen and understood. What's your experience like?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, I grew up in London, south of the River Thames, and you do have that divide then. And London's not huge,
Mm,
but there is a very distinct difference in the north, east, south, and west of London. And you
mm,
even find that, I mean, I'm a massive soccer fan. In the UK, you would call it football.
yes.
Um, but there's huge rivalries between the north and south of London, and we're just divided by a river. But there are uh, distinct differences with accents.
Really?
Yes, yeah. Just
Wow.
between the north and south, there are distinct differences between the accents, um, and culturally as well. If you go to north, east, south, and west, there are differences that you'll pick up on, and people will pick up on the fact that you are not really from there.
Mm,
So yeah, even in a relatively small city like London, there are very distinct differences depending on where you go.
mm,
Um, but I think for me, to your point, there is that, and you do hear it and you do see it. There is that um, comment or that notion or thought process around the accents, and depending on where you, I mean, if you're from further up north of the UK, yeah, you do find that some individuals will pick up on certain comments or certain terms used, and that will be the focus, really, instead of the content of your speech or the conversation you're having. That would be the focus point. And yeah, it's very. I mean, I think in this day and age, it's very sad that that's the case. But yeah, it really is, and I've experienced that as well. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. It is the case.
And I've experienced that in India as well. Also, primarily because India, all the different states have different languages, so it's very easy to spot if you're not from there, and people do make it a point to call that out. So the focus then becomes that as opposed to what you're saying. So I've had the same experience as well. Do you see that here in the US in your experience?
Not really. I think I think definitely when I first made the transition over, certain terms that I would use again did confuse some individuals, and I totally understand and I get that. And also when it comes to dialect as well, like perfect example, water. I found I had to repeat myself numerous times until I started saying water, because it was confusing. It was just like, oh, I didn't catch that. And certain words, like in the UK, we would say aluminium, and in the US it's aluminum.
Yes.
Making those slight adjustments, and also when it comes to the written aspect as well,
Yes.
right?
The spellings.
Exactly. So making those adjustments, again, it took a bit of time, but now I kind of get it. But yeah, slight tweaks here and there that I had to make. Another example would be in the UK, when you take the subway, it's called the tube.
Yes.
So initially I started asking for directions, and I referenced the tube, and obviously no one had a clue. And then conversely, when I used to travel back to the UK, again, I would forget and I'd say subway, and I'd be directed to a subway restaurant type place more than anything. Yeah. So little, I guess, just differences that, again, you don't realize until you're kind of immersed in it. Then you actually think, well, actually there is some differences there, and you have to make those adjustments, and consciously as well, because it gets frustrating for you as well as individuals that you're trying to have conversations or communicate with. So you have to obviously remember where you are and know that you have to make those adjustments.
Yeah, I think that these are sort of like the lighter or the fun aspects of getting used to a certain place. The one that always gets me is trying to help people pronounce my name. At least you don't have that.
Yeah. And again, I think my parents consciously were thinking about that when they were making the decision to name me. I mean, Nigel is quintessentially a British name. So Nigel Wison is, a very British name. And that was a conscious decision by them, for sure.
I remember you mentioning that once, and that's another interesting aspect. I mean, something that you didn't have a choice in, but that what do you think of that? I mean, how has it served you having sort of like a very neutral British name?
Definitely when it came to any sort of interview process, again, speaking to someone on the phone with a British accent, it's difficult to discern what ethnicity they are, right? And especially if you throw the name in as well. I think some folks would instinctively think that they were speaking to someone who was a white male. And on numerous occasions, I always found that if I was going through an interview process over the phone, and I made it to the in person, there would be, and I would meet the person that was going to be conducting the interview. There would be a certain look. They weren't expecting me to look the way I did,
Yeah.
and I understand that. I get that. And again, when you take into account my voice as well as my name, you can understand that. So I have experienced that, and to some respects, I do feel that it definitely has helped me get through some barriers, some challenges which would have been there if my name was deemed a little bit more kind of ethnic. So I definitely think that just subtle changes such as that, which you don't really think about at the time, have a significant impact in opportunities and careers for sure.
Yeah, and this is like another form of code switching that those of us who live in dominant cultures, dominant majority cultures, have to do constantly in order to survive. And I can definitely speak to that. And I feel like after a while, you don't even realize that you've changed so much. And I had that sort of awakening a couple of years ago, and I felt how far I've come from who I really am. So that's very deep, in a way, Nigel, that what you shared, and your name, and how that your name itself, somebody's name can be a barrier or a prop for success, is just such an it's a baffling phenomenon, but it's true.
Yeah.
So, and for those of us who catch the recording, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this, because I've had many conversations where, with folks like myself, people from other parts of the country that have immigrated here, or even in India, I've experienced that just with the name. And your last name specifically, your surname, there's so much that people can find out about you or assume about you. Let me put it that way, right? So, like if it's like my surname, for instance, me being a woman, it's assumed it's my married surname, and then people look at you if because my husband's last name is different from mine, and then we have to explain that. We've had to explain that even here in the US. So it's very interesting how that happens, and whether it opens doors for you or whether it closes some on you. It all boils down to that. And I just realized as I was talking, as you were sharing your experience, and that's something that you really don't have a choice over, because you're given a name, unless of course as an adult you decide to change it to something totally different, right? But that's something you have to, it's a part of you that you really don't get to choose. So that's interesting. I want to, as we sort of wrap up our conversation today, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Nigel, is what would you like to share with others who may be sort of in the same intersection or a similar set of intersection as you? What might help them own their story the way you have done it? What's worked for you, and what you would like to share with others?
I mean, I think based on my experiences, I think embracing that cultural dynamic is important. I know that especially anyone from biracial background does struggle to find that kind of identity, right? One or the other. It's like you can't be just your authentic self. You have to have a affinity to one or the other. I think it's important for you to be your authentic self. See it as a positive, the fact that you've got this dual and diverse mix. I think it's important to embrace that and not shy away from it. I think you would aid others who are also struggling to find their way and have that kind of true identity. I think being open and honest and having the conversations as well is important. I think again, as I mentioned, the focus on DEI in a lot of organizations, and I think in the US as a whole, as well as other countries, there's the opportunity to have open and honest conversations around our differences and what makes us unique. And I think folks should feel empowered to be honest and open around their challenges, to help others as well as helping themselves. I think that will help us as a society embrace our differences and allow people to be more inquisitive, right? See this as a positive, the fact that there's so many different cultural differences that make us unique, that should be embraced, and people should not feel that they can't discuss them. There should be platforms there. I think that's the only thing that will help us grow as a society as well, ensure that everyone has a place. Yeah, I'm not sure if I went off on a tangent there.
Oh, no, you didn't. Actually, I was getting ready to ask you. So, what have you, how have you enabled this for your own teams?
So I've been very direct when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion within my own team. I've made it very clear that this will always be a safe space. I think it's important for, irrespective of your ethnicity, to feel that you can ask questions because you want to be educated, especially those individuals who want to be allies. Right? I think historically, folks have felt that, you know what, I can't relate, I should not say anything, I shouldn't ask questions. But that's the wrong, in my personal opinion, that's the wrong approach. I think it's important for all of us to feel that we can be honest and open. I mean, there's the individuals who've never experienced any sort of racism. They've never seen anyone who has experienced racism or spoken to anyone. And a lot of this is pretty new to them. And I think it's important for us to have honest and open conversations, because that's the only way we'll be able to learn and grow as a society. I think when it comes to my responsibility as a leader, it's all about being open, honest, and a good listener. Sometimes folks will not really know the right thing to kind of say, but they want to at least try and understand and be better educated and understand what they need to do. I mean, we've talked about unconscious bias. It's important for folks to realize what those are and how they pick up and how they could potentially impact someone else, make folks uncomfortable. If folks don't know, how can they actually turn things around? So I think it's important for us to always be open and honest and allow individuals that platform to help be better educated and make a difference. And I think for me, that's what I've tried to instill within my team. That we want to have these conversations and we shouldn't shy away from them.
Thank you. And hey, Jesse. So Jesse says, very insightful point. Differences should be a platform to start conversations. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. So Nigel, thank you so much for sharing, so with so much courage and such a lot of reflection as well. I absolutely enjoyed our conversation. I wanted to ask you if you had any parting thoughts to share as we wrap up our conversation today.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed the session. I think, you and I have had conversations around our lived experiences. As you mentioned, I mean, we started through the Female Foundry, and we continued our conversations and mentorship, which has been great. It's helped me as well uncover certain things about myself, which has been great. I think from a parting thought standpoint, I think I'll go back to the comment I made before, that it's important for us to be honest and open. I think when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's all about being better educated and being inclusive, right? I think it's important for all of us to make this a focus, because we won't be successful otherwise. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, not just from an ethnicity standpoint, but also bridging the gender gap, and that's something that we're focused on within technology as well. There's a massive void there, and it needs to be addressed. But we just need to ensure that the focus remains, and folks always have a safe space to feel that they can share their thoughts and experiences without being antagonized or feel persecuted in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, that would be my passing thought. But these sessions that you're conducting are really great, and I think it's really focusing a spotlight which needs to be there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we have Yosina. Hi, Yosina. And she says, thank you for being so open about it. I'm a white woman with no personal experience of real racism. And yes, I do think talking and sharing about it will help to solve it. Thank you so much. So Yosina is based in the Netherlands. I've had the opportunity to meet her on LinkedIn. Every day. She says we can learn so much every day. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Can't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nigel, and thank you, Jesse and Hosina, for joining us. And I know that I'm also looking forward to hearing from folks that will watch the replay. This is available on the YouTube channel as well as on LinkedIn. So really, really appreciate your time, Nigel. And I feel like I've learned so much. I got a different perspective about your lived experience as well, and we've been talking for more than a year. This only goes to show that there's so much waiting to be discovered, and these conversations play a big role in unpacking intersections similar to this. And I look forward to having you again sometime, because I think that there are so many aspects that are still worth a conversation. And the other thing is, I do want to continue to explore this particular intersection, the culture, gender, and language piece. I think, especially in the context of the future of work and how our lives are changing, how our ways of work are changing. We're living longer, people are working longer. So there are so many aspects of diversity that play out. And I always believe that diversity is a fact and inclusion is a choice. And it's really on us how well informed are we about making that choice? So thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us, Nigel, to talk about this, and really, really appreciate your time and your engagement. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for watching and for tuning in live, and look forward to hearing from those that will catch it on the replay. Thank you again. Take care. Bye, everyone.